Awesome. Thank you so much, Brennison. And want to thank Brennison and women's advocates too for all the wonderful work they do and for letting us partner with them. So I want to start off by inviting you to share your name and position in the chat, and we'll reflect on it a little bit more in a minute. Sydney, do you want to move through our overview quick?
Yes, absolutely. Hi, everyone. I'm Sydney. Just to give you kind of an overview of the objectives that we'll be hitting on during this presentation today. Some topics we'll discuss will be kind of just in general, what does emotional safety mean for children? And with that, we'll give you a bit of an overview of the impact of trauma on child development and how that can contribute to emotional safety. Then we'll move into also talking about why emotional safety is important for children, how parents and caregivers can help children feel emotionally safe, and how parents and caregivers can demonstrate emotional safety for their children. Also, how parents and caregivers can help children learn to self-soothe and regulate their emotions. And then finally, we'll touch on developing an emotional safety plan for children that can be useful in helping cultivate emotional safety.
Awesome. And then we can introduce ourselves as well. So I'm Mary. I've done a few others of these webinars, so some of you might recognize me. I am an early childhood therapist at Domestic Abuse Project, which is physically located in Minneapolis, although all of our services are virtual right now. So I mainly see early childhood clients ages 0 to 6. And I also see some older kiddos for individual play therapy services, and I facilitate support groups for caregivers and a group for kids who have witnessed domestic violence as well. In my background, I've done a lot of day treatment services, done individual and family therapy, and a lot of diagnosis and assessment as well. I'm really excited to be here with you. My passion really is talking about kids who have experienced trauma and how to support them. And just excited to hear the questions you have and kind of to see how we shape the conversation together. Sydney, want to hop in?
Yes, so I'm Sydney. I'm the case management intern at the Domestic Abuse Project. So I work on DAP's first call line, which is kind of our resource line, helping make appointments for clients, get them connected with services and with resources in the community that relate to domestic violence. And then as well, I help out with short-term stabilization-based case management for DAP clients who are receiving other services with us, including therapy services. So primarily working on finding clients housing when they're fleeing from domestic violence, but also other resources, education, employment, food, things like that. I graduated in 2020 from Boston College, so I'm newly out of undergrad and I'm planning to attend law school in the future, but I'm really loving working with DAP in the nonprofit industry, seeing what that's like, and I'm really happy to be here today.
Yeah, and before we move on to our next slide, just looking at all of the wonderful folks who have shared who they are and what they what they do in the chat. I'm seeing we have a good amount of advocates here, some advocates at shelters, some legal advocates, some housing advocates from all over, a good amount from Minnesota. We have someone from Oregon. That's super exciting. We have some caregivers and survivors here too, which is awesome. Really glad to see you. We have someone from North Carolina, super exciting. Someone from Houston, Texas. It's fun to me to see how we're all coming together all over the nation. You know, although COVID has been absolutely just devastating on so many levels, this seems like one of the areas where it really has encouraged people to be able to build more of a network and reach out, you know, more all over the country. Yeah, lots of folks from Minnesota, from Twin Cities area. Ooh, we have someone from New York, someone from West Virginia, someone from Florida. That's exciting. But yeah, oh, seeing a future therapist here. Awesome. Glad you're going to join our ranks. Yeah, welcome to everybody. Thank you for joining us. Really, really excited that we're here, that you're here.
Awesome. So kind of moving into the original or the kind of general content portion of the presentation, we just want to start off by kind of giving an overview of emotional safety and just encouraging you all to think about what emotional safety means and what a child who is emotionally safe looks like, sounds like, feels like. So feel free to type in the chat if you are interested, kind of just what you think of when you think of emotional safety for children. I think a lot of times it might be easier for us to identify what a child who's emotionally unsafe looks like. So it can be helpful to think about what emotional safety looks like and just keep that in mind as we go forward. I'll just give people a minute to think about that before we move on. All right, I'm seeing that someone said that emotional safety can be knowing that your parent will accept you and be with you regardless of what you're feeling, how you're behaving. I think that's a really great point. Being able to identify and talk about feelings without worrying, that's a really good general definition. Being confident, being connected to the heart and brain, knowing you can make mistakes, not fearing punishment. Awesome. Being able to freely express how they feel, getting basic needs met, feeling confident and accepted and comfortable, and being themselves. These are all really great definitions. Feeling loved, being able to express love. Awesome. Yeah, I think overall, emotional safety, just being free to express emotions as they occur, not experiencing emotional harm, being comfortable, being vulnerable with others, and sharing emotions without fearing criticism or blame, which is a lot of what you guys are touching on as well. Yeah, feeling joyful and safe, comfortable expressing curiosity, asking questions. These are all really awesome answers of what emotional safety can look like. So thank you guys for those. And we'll keep that in mind as we go through and talk about emotional safety throughout the presentation as well.
Okay, yeah, so to build off of that, Sydney and I, while we were building this presentation out, we were thinking, you know, what does an emotionally safe child look like, sound like? What do they feel like? So a child who is feeling emotionally safe will move through the world without hesitation. They'll be able to explore, they'll be able to be curious, which is so much of really what childhood is learning about the world that way. And then likewise, they're able to reference adults for as they move through the world, as they make these discoveries. So they can ask questions, you know, what's this, what's that? They can have pleasant interactions and shared joy, you know, even if it's just like, oh, I see something beautiful, I want you to see this too. I want to share this joy, this interaction with you. And then able to get their needs met with these adults as well, you know, asking food, asking for water, asking for a hug if they're scared, and they're able to trust that these adults will meet their needs. They can experience a range of emotions freely, and they can share these emotions with others, whether they're some, you know, a positive emotion, a negative emotion, whatever that is. And then when they feel those strong emotions, they can keep their bodies safe while doing so, and while still experiencing those. And like, I do want to point out too that we're not expecting perfection there. You know, toddlers hit, and sometimes older kids do too. And it often looks like phases, right? They'll do it more, and then they'll kind of figure out how to regulate a different way, and it might fade off a little. So want to really continue to maintain that that's normal, and we don't expect perfection, whether in terms of like of like body safety or emotional regulation, that it is hard for kids. And we don't say a child is only emotionally safe, if they are 100% of the time able to regulate, but that on the whole, we are seeing that they're building these skills, that they have kind of the fundamentals down, and that it's looking developmentally appropriate. So similar to what peers are able to do. Another thing is that kiddos who are emotionally safe would be able to connect with new adults and form healthy relationships with them. So like a teacher, maybe a family member who suddenly lives closer, that they're able to be vulnerable and to eventually learn to rely on them. They can also share their thoughts, feelings, and questions openly without being worried that they will be criticized. And then they can reference their own emotion and connect their feelings to actions. And for example, like, oh, I did this because I was feeling mad. I did that because I was feeling happy. And we will talk later about how to support this as well. They can ask questions like we talked about earlier, and they learn from their caregivers' emotional experiences. They can be vulnerable, and that's really the core of what I think about when you think about emotional safety, just being vulnerable with others, being able to let your guard down, to say I was wrong, or I need help, I can't do this, and to be able to trust that that adults will help them, whether that's like a caregiver who they are very close with, or maybe a different form of vulnerability with a less close adult. And then similarly, that they can be like silly, they can be goofy, they can be creative, and they can share this with adults. That's another form of vulnerability, right? It's just being like a total goofball and trusting that adults won't criticize or shoot them down, but that adults will join in that goofiness. And I want to encourage you all to that as you do have questions, you can pop them in the chat or in the Q&A section, and we will get to those at a couple different times through the presentation. I want to encourage you to kind of make this a dialogue. So, yeah. Okay, so now we'll have a poll here. So how can we tell if a child doesn't have emotional safety? I'll give you a little bit to answer this. Okay, maybe another couple of seconds here. Okay, and then awesome. So we're seeing, all right, and I apologize too if you see me looking upwards. I have a dual screen set up, so sometimes I look at my other screen as well. But so this was a trick question, right? So all of these are ways that we can tell if a kiddo does not have emotional safety. Kids react in lots and lots of different ways when they're not emotionally safe, and this might change dependent on circumstances too. But I like that our top choice here was being withdrawn and not interacting with others, because I worry sometimes that when we think about kids not being emotionally safe, we go right to thinking about being angry or irritable, but in a lot of cases, we do see more of that withdrawal or of like internalization of those feelings, and that's just as important to look out for as more of the externalizing reactions. All right, can pop over to the next slide. And yeah, I'm seeing we're naming that it carries over into adulthood as well. That's absolutely true. A lot of these learned reactions from childhood do carry over into adulthood, and that's part of why I'm so passionate about working with kiddos, is hopefully we teach them different ways to cope so that we don't take all of these behaviors into adulthood.
So, and kind of going off of that poll, some ways that we can tell if a child doesn't have emotional safety. One maybe of the most obvious ways is through emotional explosions that seem disproportionate to the situation or that occur frequently. So this could look like a tantrum from a toddler or an older child provoking an argument or losing their temper. Additionally, children may hide emotions or seem concerned that the adults in their life might not be able to help them or respond adequately to their strong emotions. So, this could cause them to kind of stuff emotions away and maybe kind of hide them a little bit. And then, in response to this, they might experience really strong emotions in certain times when things kind of bubble over. So, another way that we can tell if a child doesn't have emotional safety might be if they are seeing caretaking adults and their emotional reactions. So, children who aren't emotionally safe might feel the need to take care of others, including the adults in their life, and how they emotionally react. And this might look like telling someone who's sad, like, it's okay, trying to help them cope with their emotions. If a kid is hiding their emotions, they might also um, have certain adults or certain situations where they feel comfortable expressing them, but not others. So a child might regularly tell like a teacher or a grandparent or something how they're doing, but might be more reserved about their emotions in other situations. It should be noted that these aren't always positive situations either, where they're being very vulnerable about their emotions. It could manifest in a way where a child is continually seeming angry or aggressive or sad with a certain caregiver or adult in their life. And this could be an indicator that that child is very comfortable with that adult, but it can sometimes feel the opposite, like they're taking things out on them because they aren't comfortable with them. Additionally, children who aren't experiencing emotional safety might struggle to accept help or affection from other people. So they might turn away or ignore others or experience angry emotions when they are given affection. As we've emphasized already, emotional safety really comes down to vulnerability in a lot of ways. So, the ability to accept affection and help from others is a very vulnerable thing, and kids who aren't used to that vulnerability might have a difficult time doing that.
All right. So what can cause a kiddo to feel emotionally unsafe? That is, it's a big question, right? So the first could be a lack of models of emotional safety in their life. So we know that kids really, really do learn through observation of the important adults and caregivers in their life. Likewise, it could be a lack of actual safety, whether that's physical or more the mental, emotional safety. They might be in situations where they really have to prioritize their own physical safety. And this is a concept we'll jump back to later as well. And just might not be in a space where they can really focus on their emotional safety. They also might have caregivers who aren't emotional safe, who don't have the space to develop emotional safety, right? They might be in a situation. So we do talk a lot about what it looks like for survivors of domestic violence. And so their caregiver might be experiencing violence. Their caregiver might also be in that fight or flight mode, really trying to make sure that they and the child are physically safe. And so neither of them is really able to be consistently emotionally safe. Sometimes basic needs not being met means that it's really hard for a child to develop emotional safety. And that can look like, food, water, shelter. And that can also be something really important for kids is having consistent caregivers. So if you have inconsistency in caregivers, a child might not be able to develop that emotional safety, that vulnerability. Sudden or frequent changes in circumstances, whether that would be frequent moves, whether that would be, again, changes in caregivers, whether that could be, and then there's other things too, such as COVID-19. There's been a lot of, even I'm thinking in the last few weeks, of school districts closing or going to all online because of COVID spikes. That's a big change for kids, and it's not something we can predict, and that can really affect emotional safety as well. And then finally, traumatic experiences. So again, really using that domestic violence lens, thinking about incidents of trauma or abuse or neglect kids might have experienced. They might have witnessed domestic violence between caregivers, and that can be very traumatic for kids. Or other things, like it could be a car accident, a natural disaster, a sudden loss, or absence of a caregiver as well. All of these things can affect the child's emotional safety.
So now we're going to move into kind of giving a brief overview of trauma and development, how trauma affects development, and then how this relates back to emotional safety. So we have a quick poll here. How does trauma affect development? I'll give you guys a minute to respond. All right, so it looks like we got the poll results. Most people did say all of the above, which is the correct answer to this question. Trauma can affect different children in different ways. It can delay developmental milestones and cause children to regress, but sometimes it doesn't affect them at all. So yeah, just wanted to kind of hit on that before we moved into some different ways that trauma can affect development. So this infographic here gives a good overview of some kind of different facets of a child's life that can be impacted by trauma they experience in childhood. So as you can see, there are a lot of really diverse effects that trauma can have on children, and a lot of these are very heavily related to emotional safety and emotional regulation. So childhood trauma can affect children's brain development and their cognition. It can affect physical health, mental health, their emotions, their behaviors, their relationships. Some ones that I might draw attention to that are specifically related to emotional safety and emotional regulation are obviously the emotions component here. Children who've experienced trauma might have difficulty controlling their emotions or recognizing their emotions, which can contribute to their feelings of emotional safety or emotional regulation if they're not able to recognize what they're feeling and communicate that effectively. Similarly, mental health can be impacted by trauma. Children's behavior can be impacted by their trauma, so they might have a difficult time regulating in the first place, and they might have poor impulse control or feel more aggressive. So yeah, these are all ways that trauma can impact children's development and also the way that they express their emotions, not only in childhood, but throughout their lives.
All right, so let's talk a little bit more about how domestic violence can affect a child's development. So often in kids who have witnessed domestic violence, we can see anger outbursts, increased agitation or dysregulation, and or aggressive behavior. And that is, so again, going back to the concept that kids learn from their caregivers, they are learning different ways to express anger. And they do learn sometimes that when you're angry, you express that in a physically aggressive way. And you often do see this with male identified or assigned male at birth kiddos. You see that boys are more likely to be identified with a male caregiver, who statistically we know is more likely to be using abusive behaviors. We can often see delayed developmental milestones. Whew, can't talk this morning, I guess. But yeah, it is very, very normal for kids who have experienced trauma, experienced domestic violence to have delays in development. It is also normal for them to be able to regain that progress later. They may have difficulty in perspective taking or empathizing, so understanding how others are feeling, putting themselves in others' shoes. They may have difficulties building relationships with others, both peers and adults. So again, talking about that withdrawal, it might look like and might have difficulty being vulnerable with others, which is often necessary to build a relationship. They might also have difficulties at school, difficulties with academics, and that looks very different this year, right? Unfortunately, because of COVID. So what I would say typically is that some kiddos who've witnessed domestic violence, you'd see them more like withdrawing. You might hear from a teacher something like, oh, we have concerns. Maybe they're not spending as much time with their peers. They might be keeping to themselves. Or they might just have difficulties doing their homework. If you're worried about safety at home, you are really not going to prioritize getting that math worksheet done. And so similarly, you might see withdrawal or internalization of questions, of feelings, of their thoughts of what they're going through. You might also see low self-esteem. Kids who witness domestic violence may think that it's their fault, that they're doing something to cause it, or that if they did things differently, it would not be happening. So there's often a sense of shame there. And that really goes across the age spectrum. So like very young children can have that sense, and then it can persist with older kids as well. They also may have fear of harm to themselves or to others, which can affect their development, and they can really need to feel the need to caretake others. So again, that goes back to what we were just talking about with shame. They might feel like, oh, if I do X, Y, and Z, maybe the abuse won't happen. Or they might feel like they need to make others happy, to cheer them up. Like if really scary things are happening at home, but I can still put a smile on mom's face, maybe that makes it better. Maybe this feels a little bit better. Okay. So how is emotional safety affected in kids who witness domestic violence? So which of the areas of impact are you most familiar with? Okay.
Oh, sorry, Mary. I may have missed that poll when I was creating the poll, so maybe we can write in the chat about that.
Yeah, that sounds great. Okay, perfect. I was so confused there for a second, but yeah, so let's put it in the chat. Have you noticed difficulties in emotional safety and regulation in kiddos who have witnessed domestic violence? And one more reminder, folks, to change the little drop-down arrow on your chat box to all panelists and attendees. Okay, so yeah, it does affect them pretty much always, in their behavior, in their relationships, in their mental and physical health. Yeah, I love that you named physical health. That absolutely is impacted. In brain development, mental health behaviors, yep, they can be aggressive towards adults. Yeah, and yes, the survey was there for a second. It just was a different question than the one we're answering right now. So we're going to do it in the chat instead. Hesitant to form connections, yes, absolutely. Having difficulty managing strong emotions or having emotional outbursts. Physical pains, yep, absolutely. Having a difficult relationship with mom, having difficulties with emotional attachment, being quiet, withdrawn, or unsure of themselves. Kids who are emotionally distant with their teachers, with others, yeah. Absolutely. Aggression, not wanting to go to school. Yeah, sometimes when things are scary at home, it feels really hard to leave. Learning to trust quickly. Yep. Yeah, so some kids who have experienced trauma learn to trust very quickly. and some learn to trust very slowly. You have both ends of the spectrum in that regard. Yeah, great answers, everybody. Thank you so much for your contributions.
So, kind of going off of that, some ways that emotional safety can be affected in children who've witnessed domestic violence. Obviously, like you've mentioned, there are many of those. One main one would be kids feeling afraid to be vulnerable with others, either feeling afraid or uncomfortable expressing their emotions and how they're feeling, or relying on others to get help, or accepting or asking for help from others when they're feeling unsafe or just when they need anything. Um, Kids who have experienced domestic violence might also feel the need to prioritize their physical safety of themselves or another person over feeling emotionally safe. And of course, this can be attributed to the violence that they've experienced, and kind of that learned behavior. Also, kids might not know ways to regulate their emotions safely. Part of this is because we learn emotional safety and emotional regulation through watching others. And if we haven't observed that from a caregiver consistently, then it might be difficult to learn this behavior and replicate it for kids themselves. Kids might also keep their emotions suppressed until they can't keep them inside anymore. It's often difficult for kids who grow up in these really volatile situations to learn how to express their emotions, and they might have learned to suppress their emotions in order to stay safe. So now, even in situations where these kids aren't in danger, where it would be safe for them to express their emotions, they might not know how to or might not feel comfortable doing so. Finally, kids might learn to share little bits of how they're feeling with others and then pause to gauge their reactions, just kind of maybe as a safety thing. This process can take time and often feel repetitive for people who are waiting for children to open up to them, but it can be a way for them to kind of maintain their own emotional safety in their own way. So yeah, going along with everything you guys said in the poll, these are all ways that emotional safety can affect children who've experienced violence in their lifetimes. So now we're going to move into some ways that we can support emotional safety in children. And one of the main ways we can do this is by validating their feelings. Um, Giving children validation of their feelings gives them a sense of control over their circumstances. So this can be as simple as restating a child's feelings or guessing what they're feeling. Like, you're stomping your feet, it looks like you're mad right now. Validating this allows them to realize that adults are listening and that they're recognizing their behaviors. Um, and this can signify to a child that when they want to communicate their feelings, adults will hear them in the future and allow them to be a part of those decisions. And that can translate to feeling increased control over how they're feeling and how they're acting. Um, Validating a child's feelings can also help them connect their emotions to their actions and experiences. So in the future, this might allow children who are being validated about their feelings to be able to name those feelings themselves and then start using coping skills and problem solving skills in order to regulate their emotions without relying so heavily on someone else to help them. Um, Validating a child's feelings also helps to communicate that you're listening and that you value their opinion and that you care about them. Especially with kids who've witnessed domestic violence, they might have had experiences where caregivers weren't able to listen to them or give them the attention they felt they needed in relation to their emotions, and they might have had to prioritize their physical safety in the past. So it can be really helpful for these kids to see that things have changed and that now they're safe and that grown-ups want to hear about their emotions and their thoughts and to walk through that with them. Um, so as a little exercise in validating feelings, here's a little example. So you tell a 4-year-old Freddie that he can have an extra large Reese's Blizzard at Dairy Queen, and he says, or that he can't, sorry, that he can't have one. And then he says, "I hate you, you're so mean." How would you validate this feeling coming from Freddie? Feel free to type your answers in the chat or just think about it on your own, and we can kind of reflect on what that would look like. So someone said, "I understand you're mad and that you can't have a treat right now and that you think that I'm being mean." I think that's a good example, kind of just reiterating that you understand what he's feeling and what he is saying in relation to the circumstances that are happening right now. Um, I understand you're upset that you can't have the extra large blizzard. Yeah. It really can be that simple. Yep, I hear that you are angry. It hurts to be called a name. I hear that you want the biggest one, but today you get a smaller one. Yeah, I understand you're upset with me. Sounds like you're really mad right now. Even, yeah, just reiterating those feelings directly. It sounds like you're mad right now. It looks like you're mad because you said that you hate me. I understand you're upset. Um, these are all really good examples of how we can, even in a really cut and dry situation like this, take a child's emotions and validate them, but also move forward from them.
Yeah, and I just chiming in there too. I think just really naming, with their experiences, like you really want that blizzard. That's so important to you right now. You know, you were just you really, really want it. I hear you. And just sometimes even sitting with that, seeing what comes up next for them when that's all we say to them. Sometimes that can be important. Sometimes less is more, to use a bit of a cliche. Okay. So another way we can support emotional safety in children is by asking questions. Just really being curious with them. How did that feel for you? How are you feeling right now? What was that like for you? Or what are you thinking about right now? And then, a big thing that we want to do when we're asking these questions is we're being curious, right? But then we want to really respect their answer, whatever it is. So if they say no, I don't want to talk about that, or I don't want you to know what I'm thinking about, like to recognize that that's okay, and to respect that choice. You're not feeling comfortable sharing that with me right now. That's okay. I'm here to listen if you do want to talk about it. Also recognizing that they might need a little bit of time to think about it. Sometimes identifying feelings or thoughts for kids is really hard. And then keeping it a little deal, so not getting into a power struggle, like, oh, you need to tell me what you feel, or that's, you shouldn't be feeling that way. Just recognizing that kids feelings and kids thoughts, that the answers like those can be unpredictable, and they're not always what we think they would be or should be. Keeping it a little deal. And I'm looking at the comments too, and something Vicky just said, take step back, take a breath, remember it's not personal. I think that goes really well here too, right? Sometimes you do need to remove yourself a little from the situation. But when we are really able to prioritize the kids' experience, the kids' thoughts and questions like that, and trying to keep our own process, our own expectations out of it, um, that not only gives them a sense of being supported, of being heard and validated, you're really listening to them as a person, but it also helps them to start asking those questions themselves. How do I feel? I just punched a door. I wonder why I did that. Again, kids learn by observing others. And so by starting to ask those questions, to invite them to be curious with you, you'll start teaching them how to be curious on their own. All right. So how can we support emotional safety in kids? A couple more ideas. So one would be modeling emotions. And this can be both, like, sometimes it happens naturally, things come up that cause us to have emotions all over the spectrum. Maybe well, hopefully this doesn't happen, but maybe you locked your keys in the car, and instead of trying to keep those emotions inside, put on a brave face. Well, there's obviously a time and a place for that. But maybe it's a time when you can say, oh my gosh, I am really mad. I'm really frustrated. This is hard. And tell that to your kiddo. Um, it and this goes to the point on the bottom, modeling vulnerability, modeling to kids that we don't always have it together, that we're not always happy. Sometimes there are times when difficult emotions come up. I think sometimes kids wonder, for adults, if they don't experience those hard emotions, if we kind of present to them as always happy, always having it together. So showing kids like, hey, I have these things happen too, but I've learned other ways to deal with them. And that's why I'm working to help support you, so you can learn these ways too. And then really narrating those emotions too, like, oh, I'm so mad. I locked my keys in the car. Ugh, I just want to, I want to yell. And you can always ask your child. So then this goes into that second point, modeling strategies. Like, what should I do right now? How can I deal with this? And in the example I just gave, maybe it's okay to yell. Sometimes yelling feels good. But you could also say like, oh, I wonder what else we could do. Can we blow out 2 candles? And that's a way of taking deep breaths. That's another example. But then, and that can really help them to feel in control. Like I suggested to mom that we take a walk, and we took a walk, and now mom is feeling better. Wow, that really worked. I bet I could try that too. And then the other thing to name when you're talking about coping skills is modeling that sometimes we can't always make it better right away. Sometimes you just feel sad, and we can try different things, but sometimes they don't work. And sometimes we just need to be sad for a little bit, and that's okay. It's okay to feel sad. You can give me a hug, and I will really, really appreciate that hug, but I'm still going to be sad afterwards, and it's not your fault. Or being mad, I'm so mad and I took a walk and I feel better, but I'm still mad. And I might just need 30 minutes to cool off. Um, and I think sometimes this feels counterintuitive, because we worry that if we don't model like that kind of quick fix for kids, that they won't think strategies work. But I think that there's some give and take there, and that kids understand a lot more than we give them credit for. And that way, too, they understand that even when their own emotions aren't regulated right away, that they can still keep trying, and that it's okay. They don't need to hide it. They can still come to you for help.
Another way that we can support emotional safety in children is to just give them space to feel big feelings that they're experiencing. This can be physical space or emotional space. In terms of physical space, often kids need to regulate, and it's easier for them to feel comfortable to process those feelings when they have room to move. So they might feel constrained if they um, don't have the space to kind of process the way they need to, but maybe climbing, jumping, running can help them process those feelings a little bit. Additionally, emotional space can be really important for kids when they're feeling those big feelings. It's important to validate and acknowledge their feelings, but to maintain a non judgmental kind of approach toward those feelings and emotions, and acknowledge that even if they're different from the feelings and opinions that you're experiencing at the time, that's okay, and they can still feel those things, and that you won't judge them for it. Um, Additionally, it can be helpful to help support children's emotional safety by narrating their emotions or their actions when they are feeling upset or angry or something. So we have some examples listed on the slide here. You're feeling so upset, you're pulling all the blankets off your bed. Or kind of going back to the example we were talking about before, you're really angry that you don't get to have that extra large blizzard from Dairy Queen. Um, and kind of helping children identify how they're feeling and what they're doing when they're feeling that way can help them put two and two together in their own head at a later time when they're feeling those same emotions. Um, like Mary said, why did I just punch that wall? If you have a time where your kid is so angry that they punch a wall, and you say you were so angry that you punched that wall, that maybe next time something like that happens, they'll it'll be easier for them to identify why they felt that way and then why they used that action as a way to cope with those feelings. Um, and narrating these emotions can be a complement to validating feelings in general. It's a way to connect their actions with their feelings and also help them understand that you are recognizing that they're feeling and acting that way, and that you are supporting them in that. And if you're incorrect in narrating a child's emotions, it's not a huge deal. You can just let them correct you and you can acknowledge that you are wrong. If they say, I'm not mad right now, I'm jealous, then you could say, oh, I made a mistake. You're jealous. Let's talk about why you're jealous right now. So it doesn't have to be a big worry that you'll misidentify their emotions. You can leave room for them to correct you. Um, and finally, it's possible to narrate while also maintaining safety. If your child is mad and they're hitting you, you don't have to stand and be an impartial observer while saying, you're so mad that you're hitting me. You can also take the actions that you need to keep everyone in the situation safe, um, while also allowing them to express those big emotions and help you regulate or have you help them regulate them.
Okay, and I know that a majority of folks here today, at least from what it looked like in the chat, are social workers, teachers, advocates, folks who maybe aren't in a main parent caregiver role. And I'm seeing something from Debbie in the chat. Yeah, making a very good point, saying like it seems like XYZ. This is your feeling. No one likes their emotions to be labeled for them. Absolutely, that is a great point. And I think too. So yeah, saying it seems like is a great add-on, because then it also invites more curiosity on your part. It seems like you're feeling this way, kind of, at least to me, sounds like you have that little bit of like, is that correct on there? So again, checking with them. Thank you for adding that. Okay, so let's talk about specifically how those supportive folks in kids' lives can help encourage emotional safety. So we talked about before that sometimes kids can be emotionally safe in some spaces, but not in others. So when you have those consistent people in their lives, I'm thinking especially about like a teacher, maybe a school counselor, where you see them every day, again, a little bit more like physically in a non-COVID world. But your space might be one where kiddos really can let those hard feelings out. And so sometimes that might look like them coming to you and talking, or conversely, sometimes it might look like that they have the hardest time there. If you're hearing this kiddo is fine at home, there's no big difficulties, but then they're coming to school and just like absolutely losing it every day. But that might also be a sign, and I know it often doesn't feel like it can feel really challenging, but that might be a sign that they actually feel really secure there. For folks who work with parents, understand that parents are doing like the very, very best that they can, and support them in this, communicate this to them. I think that parents, especially parents who are experiencing domestic violence, really encounter a lot of blaming or shaming messages. And there's a lot of people who question their decisions, who wonder why they don't do things differently, or who try to tell them what they need to do. So just really understanding that parents are the experts on their kids' lives. They are doing the best that they can, and being a partner with them, supporting them in their decisions rather than trying to guide what their decisions are. And being really pretty explicit in your communications about this. Like, I understand that you might have had these messages before. I want you to know that I'm here to support you, and I'm here to support your kids in whatever way feels right to you. Also educating other people, kind of like those satellite people in kids' lives, about what emotional safety is, about what it might look like for kids and how we can support kids. A lot of folks out there are still developing an understanding of trauma and how it affects kids and impacts them. And unfortunately, this can look like more of blaming and shaming narratives towards kids as well. So really taking the time to share whatever sort of education you can with other folks in kids' lives. I think this has been a big theme in the presentation, but being curious, wondering with kids, what do their comments mean? What do their actions mean? What do their words mean? And is there a theme of emotional safety there? Are you bringing these things up because you feel safe with me? Or maybe is it hard for you to be vulnerable with me? Is emotional safety really challenging for you right now? And then doing some safety planning with kids, both physical and emotional. And we will go through what a little bit more of like a concrete safety planning process with kiddos looks like at the end of the presentation today. And again, for folks who are in those social worker, teacher, advocate roles, if you have more specific questions about how you can support kiddos, feel free to pop it in the Q&A and we will answer those questions more towards the end of the presentation. I'm such a nerd. I love questions. So, keep them coming. Okay, so how can we support emotional safety during the holidays coming up? So generally holidays are such a time of instability for kids because there are big circumstance changes, right? Like you have 2 weeks off of school, and that can really, really look big, especially for kids who are experiencing domestic violence at home. Obviously, this year is all up in the air. Less kids are going to school. There are still some who are doing in-person learning or hybrid learning, so that will still look like a change. But either way, they will have less educational access, whichever way they're accessing it. And so there will be a big change in routine. So yeah, we want to acknowledge that and understand that emotional safety might look different because changes in routine often affect children's emotional stability, which obviously includes emotional safety. Also understanding that holidays can bring traumaversaries. So if kids have experienced trauma around the holidays, that will be difficult for them. And as well as kids who have had changes in circumstance, if there's a family member who was there in the past and it won't be there for these holidays, that might be an especially hard time for them. Also holding that different people within families might have different feelings towards family members. Some might be really missing them. Some might be not really sad at all that they're gone or feeling happy about that. And then feeling too for parents that it's a parent's job to hold all of those perspectives as well as what their own perspective is. So thinking of supporting not only the emotional safety of those kiddos, but also of their caregivers, of their parents, if you can, because that's a huge, huge job. So preparing overall, like I'd mentioned, for their emotional safety to decrease, that there will likely be more dysregulation or withdrawal, and that they may need more support from caregivers, even for simple things. I think probably caregivers hear this advice a lot, and it's probably feeling pretty old by now, but maintaining a routine, even if it's just really, really simple, really basic, which provides an increased sense of control and predictability for kiddos. And then finally, creating an emotional safety plan for a child, which we'll talk about again in a little bit here. And as well as sometimes physical safety planning can feel helpful as well.
Another thing we wanted to touch on was the usefulness of sensory supports and how helping children to emotionally regulate and cultivate emotional safety. So one thing that often comes up when talking about sensory supports is these calming or calm down corners and the usefulness of those. And that can be a really helpful strategy for kids in helping them calm down, regulate their emotions. But it's important to ask yourself why you're creating that for a child rather than using it as a one size fits all kind of fix for emotional problems. So, thinking about for the specific child that you want to use this for, do they need a space that's entirely own or that's entirely their own to sit in and to regulate their emotions in? Do they need to like what kinds of tools in that environment or in that corner would be the most helpful for them to help them calm down? Do they need to have more stimulation? Do they need to be separated from stimulation? And then it's also important to help kids understand how they can use this corner rather than just creating it. And then when an emotional problem comes up or they're feeling upset or angry, to just say, go in your calm corner and calm down. Um, if you put certain tools in there for them to use, then show them how they can use them and what emotions they might help them regulate. So we have some examples here of how we can support regulation with sensory supports. Um, there are a lot of options. Heavy work can be helpful. So things that kids can push or pull or slide or climb or shovel and scoop and carry, just to help them feel less overstimulated. Another thing can be food can be helpful. So either cold or warm textures and temperatures can help children regulate. Ice cubes can be helpful. Yogurt, warm foods can be helpful too. Another thing that could be helpful in terms of food is like sour tastes can kind of shock kids out of a flight or flight type of response. It's like warheads or sour candy. Chewy textures as well can kind of provide that similar heavy work type of thing. So taffy or chewy foods, of course, when it's developmentally appropriate for that kid to have those foods. Deep pressure can also be helpful. So squishes on the kid's hands or feet or laying them on a mat and having an adult apply pressure with a beanbag or an exercise ball. Of course, when doing things like this, where the kiddo has a little less control over what's happening, it's important to continue to communicate with them and let them know that it can stop whenever they want it to. Additionally, auditory stimuli can be helpful. So letting the kid listen to music to block out noise or to calm them down with something that's kind of a gentler tune. Tactile stimulation, like allowing them to play with some rice or beans or some Orbeez or water beads or just a bucket of water or snow, can be helpful as well. Giving them some strongly scented items like essential oils or other strong scents can be grounding as well. So these all can be really useful for children who need that sensory support in order to help them calm down. But again, it's just important to think about the needs of an individual child and how these tactics could be or couldn't be so helpful for them. Additionally, just wanted to say down here that occupational therapy evaluation could be helpful for children with consistent sensory needs. So if this is something that continually comes up for a child and um, is a helpful, if sensory supports are a helpful thing for them, then it could be useful to have them meet with an occupational therapist for an evaluation to see whether that's something that's going to be useful for them going forward as a more long-term approach to helping them regulate their emotions and their feelings, or even just to get tools for how you going forward as a parent or a caregiver or a social worker working with kids can help them use these sensory supports to address those needs for them too.
Yeah, I just want to name real quick that there is a link at the bottom of the page with more ideas for heavy work, because the things you can do for heavy work, which is that proprioceptive input. So kind of one of our senses of like movement of where we are in the world. So there's some great ideas there, and there's a ton just like out on the internet, and that can be really useful. Okay, so how can we support kids in self-soothing? So first is to observe what they already do when they are dysregulated. And oftentimes kids know what they need, and they are able to get it from their environments. You can also ask them, like, what do you need right now? And they very well might not be able to understand. Like when kids are dysregulated, when they're in that fight or flight response, they oftentimes are less able to both to articulate their feelings and to just express themselves in general. But it is still worth asking the question, and it's worth revisiting it when they are regulated. And then noticing what does help them. Is it that they went to get a drink of water? So again, thinking about those cold temperatures, that they're jumping on the couch and then they leave the room. So then you can kind of infer a theme from those. So if they always want a drink of water, is it that, maybe a cold temperature helps them? Or if they are really wanting to get like a sippy cup or drink from a straw, that sucking with their mouth can also be a form of sensory input. So maybe it's that actually really helps them to regulate. Or if it's that they're jumping on a couch or moving fast, I think a lot of times, especially with younger kids, you do see them moving very quickly when they're upset or doing like running, jiming, jumping, climbing. And that often is a way that they are trying to regulate, so maybe their body does need those big movements. Or maybe it's that they're trying to escape a space. Do you notice that they're kind of just jumping and jumping and jumping? Or do you notice that they jump and then run out of the room? Or if they are leaving the room, or trying to get out of a space, then how can we create a space that feels separate for them? So sometimes that could look like a pair of noise canceling headphones or a white noise machine. Maybe you make a blanket for it. Maybe you make a pillow for it if you can't actually get out of the room, or maybe you go for a walk with them. And then trying other things as well. So like those things that I was just naming, like seeing those themes, trying other activities as well, and eventually, hopefully, you and kiddo will be able to find other things that work for them. Yeah, and I see a comment from Tiffany too, saying if they have a habit such as sucking their thumb, not like shaming or blaming them for that, directing to a new and more positive habit instead. Yeah, absolutely. And I think too, understanding that the time when they're going to be able to practice using something else will not be when they're dysregulated. When kiddos are kind of in the thick of it, they are going to use what works for them. So they might be sucking that thumb and just allowing that to happen, and then maybe practicing with them when they're calm, saying that, hey, I noticed you have been sucking your thumb. The doctor is a little worried that might hurt your teeth. So what else could we do instead? So could we, get a drink of water from a straw? Again, you're still getting that same sucking input. Could we freeze a popsicle? Or could we freeze a tube of Go-Gurt, so then you still have something to suck on. But practicing that when they're calm before you start practicing it when they're dysregulated. Yeah, great point. Thank you, Tiffany. And then if we can jump to the next slide. Thank you, Bernison.
Awesome. So then in terms of developing an emotional safety plan or a self-care plan, here's a little template that parents or caregivers can use in collaboration with kiddos in order to help them kind of plan out when they're feeling certain emotions, what are they going to do? And so the kind of main point of this is to help them define how they think and feel and act when they're feeling a certain emotion. So how does this physically feel for me, or how does it mentally feel for me when I'm angry or when I'm upset? And then what are the things I'm thinking about? What are the actions that I'm doing when I'm feeling that emotion? And then to help them identify 3 people that they can go to, whether it's a trusted adult, well, it probably should be a trusted adult of some kind, but doesn't matter what facet of life they're from, people that they can go talk to when they're feeling that way, some places that they can go in order to help them, and also some 3 calming strategies that they can use. So kind of identifying when they're feeling dysregulated, here's some resources I can use, some people I can go to, some places I can go, some things I can do to kind of try to calm myself down and reset that feeling. Additionally, it can be helpful to include in there if a situation is a little more extreme, if there's an emergency, here are some resources I can use, like calling 911 or a crisis line or reaching out to a trusted adult. But this is something that can be really helpful for adults to create collaboratively with children so that they have a plan going forward that they can reference. Sorry about that. when they are feeling those emotions. And this is something that, especially the feeling, the thinking, the acting, is something that you want the child to define themselves, so that when they are feeling these emotions, it's a most accurate portrayal possible of what they can do going forward and how they can identify that they're feeling that way. Um, and it can be helpful if you want to do something like this with a kiddo to do it yourself as well, just so that one, you know what it feels like and it looks like to do the safety plan so that you can help walk them through it, but also so that you can say, look, I did this as well. This is what it was like for me. Here are some things that I identified that would be helpful for myself, so that it's that modeling behavior. They can see, oh, they did this too and it works for them. This will be helpful for me. Um, but yeah, it's a really helpful strategy to use. I don't know if you want to jump in on that at all, Mary.
No, I think that's wonderful. Okay, so that is just about the end of our presentation, and I see we have some questions. We'll pull these up here, but yeah, both of our email are on here. I know that Brenison will send them out as well. Our social media handles are on here too. Definitely give us a follow. Our Instagram has been super active lately, so that's lots of resources there. And also, yeah, definitely encourage you to follow Women's Advocates. They've had some excellent Instagram content as well. And I'm realizing now that I did not put more of like a summary of the services that we offer, but DAP does provide services for the whole family, anyone who's affected by abusive behaviors. So please feel free to reach out to Sydney or I if you have more questions. Okay. So I'm looking at our questions now. So the first one I'm seeing is my client's grandchildren's father is emotionally and verbally abusive, feeling strongly that the kids need therapy, but they haven't had it. Wondering how seriously this is taken by CPS, and if a parent can be ordered to get kids into counseling or therapy. So that's a really tricky question. And unfortunately, I think a lot of it is specific to CPS in your state and in your county. I have seen therapy court ordered as part of a CPS plan. However, I don't know if there's quite a trend there. You know, I wouldn't be able to say if there's a certain set of circumstances that would mandate it. I think it can be more up to the worker who's involved and the standards and or procedures of the specific county. So if this is well, obviously it is a concern for you, right? So I mean, one thing that I would say is that you can always report abuse to the local county's Child Protective Service Agency, and you can also consult with a local agency. A domestic violence agency might be able to help, and just reach out and say, hey, this is going on. I am curious, you know, what you would recommend, or if you have any knowledge about if similar cases have been recommended for therapy. And I'm sorry that I don't have a more conclusive answer for that. You can certainly reach out if you are in our local area, and we can provide more support, but it's really tricky to answer those because unfortunately it is much more of a case-by-case basis. Can you touch on the relationship of having emotional safety as a kid and the transition into adulthood? So a child not having emotional safety and the way it might be expressed as an adult. That's such a great question. Yeah. So like I'd mentioned earlier, you know, that is super valid. And I think a lot of folks as adults might have learned some coping methods to deal with maybe not having emotional safety as a child, or just not having maybe enough emotional safety as a child. So emotional safety really looks like being able to be vulnerable with folks, being able to share your emotions with folks, whether that is, positive or negative. So we can think about how that might look like for an adult, so maybe an adult or, an adolescent really isn't able to open up with others. Maybe they appear closed off or withdrawn. Or on the other end of the spectrum, you might be really vulnerable with people. You might be super quick. You might see someone who is creating all of these new relationships, but then is characterized as an oversharer. And it might also be somebody who's having trouble using coping strategies for their own emotions. You might see someone who does have big anger explosions. You might see someone who doesn't really seem to react, who's really internalizing those emotions. Or you might see someone who seems a little bit cut off or closed off from the world. I guess what I'm trying to hit on here is that it can look really, really different for a lot of different people. Depending on the child's experience, depending on the ways that they were shown to express or to not express emotions, but that there really are some big parallels from how emotional safety looks as a child to then how it can be translated into adulthood and the coping strategies they do learn to use. And one final thing that I'll say is that you do see more of coping strategies that I think would traditionally be called unhealthy or not helpful. So thinking about like substance use, or things like that as coping strategies, as you have more of like the adolescent adult years, you do see folks using those more often, because those are accessible, right? Because those are something that is consistently helpful. So if you are working with individuals who are using those strategies, I think really trying to come at it from a perspective of like, I understand that these are things that work for you. And I understand that that this is necessary for you to get through your day. But, I also wonder if we can come up with some other ways and if we can talk about what emotional safety looks like so you can have some other supports as well. I hope that was helpful. Sydney, would you add anything there?
No, I thought that was great.
Okay. And then I'm just checking out. Okay, we're pretty good on time still. I have a child who's not been willing to meet up with me because I'm a new youth advocate. They were very close with their old advocates. I'm trying to find ways for them to be more comfortable with the idea, such as letting their mom stay, bringing a friend with, have met in person with their moms, so they're familiar with my face. None of these ideas have worked. Any ideas to get them more comfortable with having me as their advocate? Yeah, so, with kids, it's always about repetition and it's about time. And that is so hard. And so it can be so frustrating. I've definitely been in the same situation, doing therapy with kids. It's hard, especially when they were really, really close with their old advocate. I think recognizing maybe it would be helpful to specifically give it a label and saying they're probably in a grief process, right? They're grieving that old relationship with their old advocate who they really liked. And just understanding that grief takes time. And it sounds like you're doing so many great things. You are being really creative. And even underneath that, it's important to name that, being creative about that, about finding a way for them to be comfortable with you, trying all these different things. It's not only helpful, but you're communicating to them, I want to make this work. I want you to be comfortable. I know that I'm new to you, but I want to be someone that you can trust. And I think in this way too, you're giving them the control. So you're letting them know, hey, you are the one who gets to decide what feels right for you. You are the one who gets to decide when you do want to meet with me. And they're for kids, there's a lot that's really helpful in that control. It feels good for them to have control and to know that they can, say yes, say no, because as a child, you really aren't in control of a lot. So I think keep doing what you're doing. It will eventually work. Probably just when you're getting to the point where you're like, I've tried everything and there's nothing else that I can do. What am I going to do now? And then they'll be like, oh, hey, come in, come play with me. Kids are kids are weird. I repeat this a lot. They're weird and they're unpredictable, and that's what makes them so wonderful. But other ways, like maybe thinking specifically, else can I help them have control? Like maybe you make a little like a red light, green light sign, and you sit, they go in your office with their mom, and then you sit like way far away from them. And they hold up the red light, and then when they hold up the green light, like you scooch a little closer. So letting them control like the closeness, or trying to figure out things that they would like to do together. If it has worked to meet in person with their mom, maybe keep doing that. Maybe just keep doing fun activities, building a relationship with them. Doesn't always feel like super important work, but it really, really is. Those little things mean a lot. And then I've repeated this so many times, and I'm going to say it again, stay curious. Stay curious about what would make it feel good for them. Keep asking that question. If they don't answer, it's okay. But letting them keep thinking about that and defining what would make it feel better for them. And again, that goes back to having control too. Great question. Sydney, would you add anything to that?
Oh gosh, I don't think so. I think you covered it.
Okay, I think we have time maybe for one or two. We have somebody's naming the zones of regulation to support youth with expression of emotions. Yeah, zones of regulation is great. I've definitely used it. And for folks who aren't familiar with that, zones of regulation there's 4 different zones. They're color coded. So like red is angry, blue is sad, green is feeling regulated, yellow is feeling anxious. And that's pretty commonly used. I've seen it used in a lot of school systems, at least around here. But it can be pretty simple and pretty concrete. So that's something you could definitely use as you're talking about it with kids. Like, hey, what zone are you in? It can be a good quick check-in. And something I've done too is sharing that template with them, but then allowing a child to create what their own zones are. So I've done there's so many kids who are into superheroes, right? So I had a kiddo choose like one superhero for each zone, and then it wasn't like, are you in the red zone? It was like, are you in the Hulk smash zone, or are you maybe in like the Captain America feeling great zone? So really letting them personalize it. Like the more you let a kid put their own input, their own spin on things, the more that they will actually want to engage with it. Okay, and then we'll do maybe one last question here. So someone had asked, if I am working with a child around 1 to 4 years old, what's the best way to correct them when they start to become violent with me? So like hitting, throwing toys, screaming. I usually validate feelings while also emphasizing it's not okay to be aggressive towards others. Is there a better way to get this message across? They usually continue to behave like that once they have started. So the younger a kid gets, the more repetition is needed before you are able to see any sort of a change. So short answer to that, no, there's not a better way to get that across. And unfortunately, it's going to take a lot of repetition, especially because once they get into that dysregulated space, okay, here's a brief little detour. I wonder if folks have heard the Dan Siegel's lizard brain metaphor. I'm guessing some of you have, but what that is kind of thinking about, so this is your brain, right? My hand is the brain, and this is the brain. On the outside, that's the cerebral cortex, which is the outside of your brain that does all of the thinking. This on the inside is like your brain stem, the more of like the core brain that and the amygdala, so like the feelings part, the core functions part. When you're regulated, your whole brain, you're capable of doing that complex thought, like processing all that good stuff. You can connect like feelings, thoughts, emotions. But when you're dysregulated, then you quote unquote flip your lid. So pop. And actually that's a fight or flight response. And the biology of that is that your brain is not prioritizing using that cerebral cortex, like the kind of outside of your brain where the higher processing is. You really go to that amygdala, that like the fight or flight mode. So you're not capable of that higher thinking. And what we have to do to regulate, we have to flip that lid back on so we can use our thought. So anyways, yeah, that's from Dan Siegel. He's amazing. Would definitely recommend checking out his work on trauma with kids. But all of that is to say that kiddos, when they are dysregulated, cannot do that higher thinking. So in the moment, when you have kids who are being aggressive and they're really little, what you are going to do is you're going to do what you need to do to keep them safe. If they're hitting you, you can gently stop their hand. If they're throwing toys, you might need to take the toys away from around them. You might need to take them to a different room. And you can still narrate that. And I would hope on some level that they're still able to hear it. You are so mad. You want to throw that toy. We don't throw toys because someone could get hurt. You can offer them alternatives, like you could throw a pillow. We could pretend to throw a toy, get creative, try different things. But a lot of times, especially when you have those toddlers, right, you offer them solutions and nope, just absolutely having none of it. And that's okay. Recognizing that, especially with those littler kids, what they need most often is time. And then you can also try to talk about that afterwards with them. Say, hey, you were feeling really, really mad earlier. Do you remember? Do you remember when you were hitting me? I want you to know I'm not mad, that I still like you. Because that's a big fear for kids, is like, do you still like me? Will you still be here for me? So naming that, and saying, but I did stop your body because it's not okay to hit other people. That really hurts. What do you think we could do instead next time? And trying to team with them. And that's a situation too where that the emotional safety plan. So just kind of referencing that, and you could make it a lot simpler for a younger child. But sometimes having some sort of like a visual reminder, maybe even just of some calming choices that can be helpful for a kid when they're dysregulated. So maybe you find like a little cartoon of, I don't know, maybe like somebody going for a walk, or a cartoon of like a soft squishy ball that they could throw and saying, hey, why don't you point to one of these when you're mad, and then I'll know what you need. So those are things you can try. But again, I want to emphasize, it's going to take repetition, and it's going to take time, and it's going to feel like it's not working, and it's going to be super frustrating, and that's okay. But there will come a time, and I want you to believe in this and have hope. There will come a time when it does work and when things get better. Okay, so we are just about at the end of our time. Thank you everyone for coming. Yeah, so wonderful to meet you all, to be here with you, and for your participation. Really, really appreciate it. And a big thank you too to Sydney for all her hard work and excellent co-facilitation skills, and to Brennison and to Women's Advocates again for hosting us, and Brennison for having the best PowerPoint design skills I have ever known, probably, and to our wonderful interpreters who have been just working so hard down there.
Thank you all so much. I just sent some instructions in the chat if you would like to receive a certificate of attendance for attending this webinar. And then again, as a reminder, we will be sending out the link to the safety plan, as well as the link to the PowerPoint slides and the recording later on today. So I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording. But thank you all so much.